Hey, welcome to the Coalesce podcast. My name's Grant.
And I'm Meg.
And we are going to cover a few things today. We're going to go back and talk about a couple things from last time. There were a couple of issues that we wanted to address, and then look at some of the searching and how you kind of do some of those built-in automatic features. So the first thing we want to dive into is we have that autosave option, and it only saved the top level. And there's a nice little parameter when you go in and you look at, let's just pull up the docs real quick so people can kind of see what that looks like, and they can see kind of how you relate to the docs and what those actually look like. So we'll pop the docs up, but effectively there is a parameter you can pass in when you turn on autosave called deep.
Yep.
And deep will allow you to, it forces the system to go in and save any dirty object. So it's going to track which objects are dirty and then go through the whole object tree and save the ones that you want to save. Now, if you don't want to do that, you can turn autosave on kind of an object by object basis if you want to, but you have to kind of traverse down the tree to do that. So this will just handle all that stuff automatically. Works really slick. So you can see here, Meg's brought up this, and you can see that there is this deep option, which then goes down and saves all things. So the way you call that, we're just going to add it back in there just as a little piece after the fact here. So once the question's loaded, you can do question, use autosave.
And the way you call it, it's just an options object. So you would make a new object, and then there's a couple things on this options object. Sorry about that one. Which if you look kind of down here, yeah, so you have a couple of options here. I'm going the right way. Let's see. Let's just type in.
Autosave, where you were there.
Oh, was I there? Yeah. Oh, yeah, right there. So there's our options. So then here we can just mention.
Figure how long. So the first one's like the debalance for the weight and that stuff. So you can just do colon true, boom, now it's going to save all the stuff. Now, one thing you have to remember is that load is going to be asynchronous, right? So you could await that if you wanted to. This will work. The autosave is just set right there, so you can handle it. You don't have to wait for the thing to load. So again, and that works with a promise of that load. There's actually a promise that's coming back there. So if you want to do either an await or a dot then, you can do that and use that syntax as well. So.
Yep. And now if we save, we can kind of take a look at the network tab to make sure this is working. So if I change this, there we go, that got saved. Now if I refresh, that is still saved.
So one of the ways this first came about is we had this page that we had to work on that had literally hundreds of fields on it, and we wanted it to save as we went. And so this is kind of where this grew out of in the early days of having this ability to just autosave. So people would never lose their work. There was, I mean, I know there's pretty strong opinions about when you autosave and when you had to do explicit saves, but there are cases where we think both really do make a lot of sense.
Yeah, and the nice thing here is you've got the bulk save that handles if you wanted to save a whole bunch of stuff manually, and then you've got the autosave with deep if you wanted to do autosaving. So you really have either choice here.
Or you go along and save everything by hand. Like you can literally go through your object tree and just call save on all the stuff and check the dirty flags and do that. But the framework really does that for you. So. All right, so one of the other questions we had was with this, when the click actually happens and you get the bulk save. So we ended up calling this, which when we call it like this, you're actually making the call and it wraps that inside of a function. And that's just how the Vue framework does that. So you're basically, because it doesn't call it when it discovers it, because that would be a problem. It knows that, hey, this is a method that's getting called and it's going to wrap that up in another function. So when you call that, it's going to then call the actual method. So that's when you put the parens at the end, that's what's going to happen when you're going to actually invoke it when it's clicked. So the question is like, why doesn't it work when you don't have the parens, right? And the reason is because JavaScript really isn't object oriented like C# is. I mean, there is a concept of objects, but it is important to kind of understand how some of these underlying pieces work because it's not the same. And what's happening here is if you call it without, what that does is it basically takes a reference to the $bulk save method without the underlying instance of the object. And then when it calls it, it just doesn't make any sense. So it can't do the thing, right? So that's why that doesn't work. You put the parens there. So what's the purpose of not calling it with the parens? And so the purpose of that is that, like, if you were to make a method down below, just make a function called save, or whatever you want to call it. It makes some problems with her keyboard. We're going to see if her keyboard works. So if she makes a save right there and right there does that and now calls question.
We'll just put something.
Yeah, but you could also call question.save.
Question, we could do that too. Why don't we actually do that? So we can pass in the question, or we can just put the
You can just
question
use the
here.
question, yeah. The question dot.
$, bulk save. There we go.
Perfect. So now this is basically doing what the thing up above is, but now we can, if we take out up on the quick event, if we just say dot save, or just save, I'm sorry, you just call the method, because save is a function that is declared inside of our script setup. And so if you just call that, now it's going to call that method down below. Now, the interesting thing here is that because the click event has incoming properties or incoming arguments that it's going to provide parameters for, it will actually call with that. Now, we're not taking anything right there, but you could down below take in the click parameters.
Yep.
So that is also an option. Now, you could also provide up in the click event, provide like a Lambda syntax where you specify your parameters and then use like an arrow function and call whatever thing you want to do with those parameters. So that's effectively like it's doing the other way where you're kind of wrapping these things up. So a little bit of a complicated thing. We're not going to get into a ton of detail about closures and stuff like that, but it's actually really important to understand. If you don't understand how closures work, it is a really important thing. And while you can kind of avoid it most of the time, it's important to understand how that works and understanding the role of this both in JavaScript. And when I say this, I mean the keyword this. It can be very confusing.
PHIS.
Yeah, right. It's this the keyword, and it's really important to understand at least at a general level what's going on, so that when you end up in situations like this, you understand context and how, especially how JavaScript can bind this to method calls. And so there's and then how TypeScript does it is actually a little bit different. It does some syntactical sugar over the top to make it more clear, which is great. And you can kind of avoid it most of the time, but every once in a while you have to understand kind of how these things work and to really get why things are happening a certain way.
Yep.
Okay, so the other thing we want to cover is to go ahead and put in the searching, right? I think that was the other piece we wanted to look at. So how do we make it so that when we search for one of these, we actually search the text of the question?
Yeah, and I think the issue was specifically here when we were searching.
Yeah, and if you have a keyboard that works, we're gonna have to get Meg
there we go.
computer here. So
I think I just need to restart here. There we go. So if I type in London, for example, nothing comes up, even though I know we have something called London. So it's just not searching right. And I think what we mentioned last episode was it was because oops, I meant to click answer, but let's just let this load. Because over here, we didn't call this name, we called it text, and Coalesce by default will look at something called name. So we've kind of just made things harder.
Now I think it will automatically index the key. So if we would have typed in the GUID for that question, I think it would have searched it correctly.
I think so. Do you know the GUID?
Well, no. Well, and maybe that's not a great idea. So let's go ahead and set up the search to work in the way that we want it to work.
Yes.
So go ahead and let's just put in the attribute on this thing.
Yep. So you would just put another attribute on this next line here, and it would be called search. And you can just put in search. Now, I don't remember exactly what this does as the default behavior.
So, the default behavior starts with.
Oh, it starts with.
Right, so we'll always do a starts with, because starts with uses an index, and we didn't want to provide, you just put search on a bunch of stuff. It's always going to use starts with. Now, starts with can be helpful in some cases, and it's fast in the database, but it's not always what you want.
Sometimes you want to do a contain search, especially for like larger text.
Right.
So for the search, if we wanted to do something like a contains, we can put in some parameters here. Now I am going to go open the docs because I think that it would be helpful to see what those parameters are. So let's look for search here. And if we scroll down, we should see the options. Yeah, so here we go. So it begins with equals, contains equals natural, and this will kind of explain what each of these do. So for contains, that one is a little bit more straightforward. That just means if you have a string and you're searching something, if that substring is contained within your larger string, it'll return that for you.
Yeah, and just be a little careful with this. If you have a zillion rows, this can get slow, and you need to move to a different kind of searching, like the full text or something.
Yes. So in here, we are just going to pass some parentheses to this attribute. Go, and we're going to say, I think is it just search method, and then let me see exactly the syntax here. I think it's search methods contains. There we go. So it's just an enum. Okay, so we're gonna have to rerun Coalesce for this, and I'm gonna stop the app because usually rerunning Coalesce will generate a couple of C# files as well. when you do something like this.
Yeah, and one of the things Meg's running that, there's Coalesce kind of works in two ways. So there are generated files. So when you go through, it's going to generate files, and Coalesce always tells you what files it's generating. Meg, do you want to run that .NET Coalesce in the window down below? I think you're running in a separate PowerShell window.
I am. I can move the window over.
Okay, you move the window over because a lot of times I'll just run it in the terminal window down at the bottom. But
yes, I just want to move to the
window.
correct directory here, which I guess would have been a solved problem if I ran it in this.
Yeah, you don't change the default, you just have to go. So you're going to move back and forth between your data project, which is going to be your .NET EF migrations add for those kinds of things when you're working with migrations, and then your Coalesce project. For your Coalesce stuff, you're going to be in your web project. And so the nice thing is that you only have to be able to for EF, you only have to be able to compile your data project, and for Coalesce, you also only have to be able to compile your data project. Because oftentimes, if you change your data model, your Coalesce stuff, your generated code is actually going to break. And so you don't have to actually be able to compile that in order to change.
Yeah, and the way I usually do this, I like to just have this open all the time. But then some people will use this terminal for their data, and then the VS Code terminal for their.
I open up two terminals in Visual Studio, one for data, one for one for .web, and then you're good to go.
So all kinds of ways to do it. Okay, sorry, I'm trying to get my keyboard to work. Go. So we're just going to run .NET Coalesce. Have that.
Yeah, and some of the things you see in Coalesce, like in this case, it actually didn't need to do anything.
Oh, okay.
The reason it didn't is because we use the compilation step and use the symbols to generate the generated code. But then at runtime, it actually reflects on your object model, and so it has an internal version of your model that it's using for things like search. And so search in this case is a dynamic function. And so we actually wouldn't have had to. And the thing is, whenever you make changes, it's just a good idea to run .NET Coalesce. If you want to look at the code, you can totally see which parts run off which. But the searching does happen to be something that is done dynamically using reflection at runtime.
Yes.
Because it's very, there's not very high cost for it because it doesn't get called out. So it's not, because reflection does have a high cost, and we use reflection once at startup and just store all the data instead of trying to do that each time. So let's give this a try.
Yeah, so here we are on our question page, and if we click on our correct answer and I start typing in London, if my keyboard will type, it'll type after I click a couple times. There we go, and then I can say, you can see we're doing a contains here, and then let's see what has a couple of the same names here. I guess that has kind of the same thing going on.
Yeah, there you go.
So we're getting two things back because these both contain an M.
Perfect. Now, the searching is actually significantly more interesting than just that.
Yes.
And so let's go back and put searching on the question. So if we go into the question text, we'll go ahead and search on that as well. And we will have to stop the code because you have to restart, because in order to rebuild the underlying models that determine what gets searched, we have to do that. So we'll go ahead and put search with the contains here as well.
And then we can stop that.
Well, we want to stop it, but we also want to search the questions too. So when we search a question, when we search a question, we also want to search all the answers.
Yes.
So we can actually put a search parameter on the list.
We can.
Which is super, I think this is super cool. So we can just come down to this little spot and we can go ahead and put a search in there. And what it's going to do is it's going to search all of the searchable parameters on the child as well.
Yep.
Or on all the children.
Do you want to do a contain still, or do you want to check?
You don't have to, because it's going to automatically.
Yeah, I think, it'll pull it from the text.
Yeah, it's just going to pull it from the text. So it basically just takes all of the ones down below and searches all those too.
It just denotes that we are allowing searching on this navigation.
Now you got to be kind of careful, and there's ways to override this. We'll get into that using data sources and things like that. But this should give us a good idea of what's going on here. So although
I think we will probably want to add a little search bar up here if we do this.
Right, totally. We could, but let's just use the admin page.
Yeah,
we can use the admin page right now to go ahead and do that search. So you should be able to search for London. Look at your keyboard.
I know. It's
you're going to have to read what that is.
There we go. So there's London.
And we're not even searching the correct answer. We could also search the correct answer, but we assume that would be part of the answer. So we're okay.
Yeah. Yep. So you can see if I type this, that's one of the answers under here.
Perfect. Even though you can't see it on the screen.
Yeah.
So great. You have to be a little bit careful about how you use that. But I think it can be really nice just to be able to kind of index your object model, especially when you have parts of your object model that are really being used for almost admin purposes, or they're really things that are going to drive other parts of your application. We find that when you're making business apps, you kind of have the part that we would call your transactional data, which you may or may not want to index this way. I mean, there's going to be parts of it that are going to make sense to do that. And then you have the other part, which is really your config data, which are populating all of your dropdowns and all that kind of stuff. And those things oftentimes makes a lot of sense to go ahead and put some search attributes on there and really build that out.
Yeah.
So, well, that's going to be it for now. We're going to go ahead. I think the next episode we're going to go ahead and do an upgrade to Coalesce, show you how to do those things. And then we're going to move on. We're going to show you some loaders, and there's several other things. We want to get that drop-down box working so it only shows you just that one, just the questions from the answers from the current question.
The answers from the current question. So we're going to get into data sources a little bit there.
And so if you have things that you want to hear about, if you have questions, please put those in the comments. Click that like button.
And subscribe.
We've never said that before. It feels weird to say that. But anyway, we hope you enjoy doing this and keep on building awesome websites with Coalesce.
Thank you.